Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to everyone in the room, councillors and officers, and also anyone watching along at home and join us on Teams. Firstly, I will pass over to the Democratic Services Officer to read out the housekeeping notices for this meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast, and it will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. And could everyone please ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum for this meeting, and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. And for those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning down the volume completely on laptops. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, and straight on to agenda item 1, which is apologies. Claire, have we got any apologies this evening?
Yes, we've received apologies from Councillor Clements and Councillor McCormack. And we have Councillor Chapman-Law substituting for Councillor Clements and Councillor Dedman substituting for Councillor McCormack.
Great, thank you very much. Do any councillors have any disclosable or pecuniary interests or other interests on any items on the agenda? I'll take that as a no. And we can move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the last meeting. The public statement which we got at the last meeting from Mr. McKinstry was not included in the minutes which you've seen, so the minutes will be updated to include that. But otherwise, has anyone got anything they want to raise on the previous minutes? And is everyone happy to accept them? Great, we'll take that as agreed. But have we got any public issues this evening?
There's no public issues for this meeting, Chair.
All right, great, we're flying through this, which is wonderful, right? So we can go on to agenda item 6, which is families in bed and breakfast hotels. We've got a number of officers joining us for this, and also Councillor Wilson, who is the Cabinet Member for Homes and Regulation. Councillor Wilson, thanks for coming. Do you want to introduce the paper?
Hi, thank you, Chair. Well, firstly, can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm happy to introduce the paper. This is really a position statement of where we're currently at in terms of families in temporary accommodation. It's not a position that we want to be in. I think everyone understands that we need to be reducing the number of people in temporary accommodation. But it also does set out some of the things that we're doing, and some of the things that the challenges that we are meeting, and what we're doing to face them. I think it's also worth noting that whilst we've seen a clear increase in the families in temporary accommodation and people in temporary accommodation in general, the work being done in terms of prevention, we've increased by 5% the amount of households we've been able to prevent, and we have over in the last year we've prevented over 2,300 families and people going into temporary accommodation and homelessness. So I think that's something to worth noting. I think I'm happy to kind of, I'm assuming hoping you've all read the paper, so I'm happy to kind of leave it there, and I don't know if any of my officers want to add anything, but happy to go into questions.
Thank you. Are you here for the duration of this item, Councillor Wilson? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Kelly or Ben, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kelly Ansell. I'm Director of Housing and Communities, and I'm joined by Ben Tomlin, who is our Head of Strategic Housing and Partnerships. I suppose just to build on what Councillor Wilson was saying, thank you for the opportunity to come and report on this really important issue to you. We're really facing a very significant challenge. We've had a 216% increase in the number of families who are needing to be placed into interim accommodation in the last year. And really, that's a reflection of what's happening in our world. You know, significant challenges around the cost of living, lots of changes in the private sector, in the private rented sector market, and some significant challenges there, both in terms of people becoming homeless through no fault of their own entirely, because landlords are exiting the market, and that then squeezing the issue for us at the other end in terms of providing suitable move on accommodation. So the report does paint quite a stark picture, but just to pick up on what Councillor Wilson has said, there is an awful lot of good work that is happening, and a significant amount of partnership work that really wraps around homelessness as an issue. But to draw this out as a particular challenge, I think, is really important because of the scale of where we are. So the report talks about, it gives you an overview of the pathways to accommodation, to support, to prevention. There's a lot of data provided in the report, and that's really just to give a sense of the scale and hopefully to aid the debate and the conversation. And also what's covered is a sense of the direction of travel. We had an away day on Monday with the Homeless Reduction Board specifically to look at this issue. And as Councillor Wilson has said, this really is a position statement, because we're in that stage of really developing an action plan that will look to address those challenges that we see at the moment. So the focus is on the challenge. I would also want to be clear that there's a lot to celebrate, and we should be sure to acknowledge the efforts of the staff who work under very difficult circumstances, and Ben and I are here to respond to questions and contribute to the debate. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. I'll take the first question, if that's all right. It's something on the paper, and thank you very much for bringing to us. It's really interesting. I'm glad that we've finally got this here. I think it's a really good starting point to be able to look at this, and the detail in the report is really good. We had a bit of a pre-meeting to discuss this as well, and quite a few things have come out of it, which I think are hopefully going to be some good points which we can raise and hopefully help and try and see what we can all do to work together to prevent, first of all, the homelessness, and also to see how we can support people better. The first question that I wanted to ask, it's related to the paper, but also not. On page 5, we've got the reasons for homelessness, and there's been a massive spike and steadying off in end of private rented tenancy, short hold tenancies. With that, and obviously with the cost of living going up, the price of mortgages going up, the price of rents going up, alongside the new renter reforms which are going to be coming in, I'd anticipate that is likely to increase further. So I'd just like to ask about the state of preparedness for that, and what we're looking at for the future, and what sort of ideas and predictions you've got for how we'll be coming in the next coming year, 2 years. Thank you.
Evening, everybody. Thanks, and good to be here to talk about this important subject. In terms of the private rented sector, we have a homelessness partnership, which I'm sure you're all aware of, and within that homelessness partnership, a number of really important stakeholders have developed an action group specifically looking and working with the private rented sector. So we've got a number of letting agents and landlords that are coming together to look at what our prevention offer is within the private rented sector, look at the legislation that we know that is coming, and explore options for not just increasing our access to the private rented sector for families, but helping to support landlords in readiness for that. So we've got a core group of 20 willing letting agents and landlords that have recently come together. It's led by an independent local landlord. So we're working with those landlords to offer some interventions and improve and plan for the information and advice that we know that lots of landlords that have maybe just 1 or 2 properties need and let out, as well as the larger landlords that will be more prepared. But we know that providing information and advice to those landlords up front will help us and help them in readiness for the new legislation that's coming.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that covers what we're hoping for from there. So I'll throw it open to the committee. Yeah, Councillor Northover.
Thank you. I was looking at point number 24,
which I think is, if I understand it right, it's about how people move out of the temporary accommodation. And I just couldn't really I don't really understand the words necessarily used there. So in the first box, I wondered if you can break down what that's all about, if that is where people are moving on after being in bed and breakfasts, if that is the case. Partly because I was wondering how much of that is going through the council list, like how many of them are gold band and then are housed that way, and how many are housed in other ways. Thanks.
Thank you. Ben?
Thanks. So we've recently increased the proportion. So the first part of that box is describing the number of lets to social housing that are provided by the council through BCP homes and with our partner housing associations. So we've increased the proportion of those lets going to those to homeless families recently in order to help us manage the throughput in temporary accommodation. All of the properties that are available are advertised on choice-based lettings, the home choice scheme. Lots of those properties are advertised with a tag alongside them where it says priority will be given to homeless families. So the allocations policy enables us to be flexible about how we do that in order to manage some of these related challenges. But every property, in terms of transparency, is advertised in that way through the homelessness choice-based letting system.
Over. Do you want to come back at all?
So are all of those 18 going through the choice-based lettings? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Any follow-up on that, or Councillor, we've got a list. I'll add you onto that. Unless, is it directly related to this point? If you want to comment on that.
If you've increased the percentage going into this, I'll call it the social housing market, just broadly. If I could ask the question effectively, what's happening to the people who would have otherwise gone in there? Because we've never had voids in council houses. So I'm just wondering, if we've moved another group in, what's happened to the people who would previously have been going into those houses?
Thank you.
Yeah, so they're remaining on the waiting list in housing need. So our allocation policy is framed in such a way that everybody on our housing waiting list, and there's 2,300 households on that list, all with a housing need. Increasing the proportion of lets to homeless families and households that become homeless mean that people that are in lower bands, for example, that may be overcrowded or have additional medical or welfare needs in association with their housing circumstances, are waiting longer on the list in those circumstances because we're prioritising homeless families.
Thank you. On this same item, just the bottom box, abandonment and lost contact, there's 8 people or families projected per month. Could you go into a little bit more detail about that? Is that people moving back in with families or people moving out of the area, etc.? Because it's quite a high number per month to lose contact with.
It's a mixture. So we make every effort to keep in contact with people when they make homelessness applications, but quite often, and this, I should say that this box and description describes families and single people and couples. So for the subject today, we're talking about families. The vast majority of families, we don't see abandonments and lost contact. So if I was to delve a bit deeper into those numbers, I would expect them to more likely to be single people and couples that lose contact with the service or abandon their accommodation because they make different housing choices or move out of the area. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Rice.
Yes, it was coming back to Councillor Rigby's question at the beginning about projected homelessness then. And I was just seeing that there was a number in here of 20%. But we haven't got a graph, I don't think, of what it may look like going forwards. So I was just like with the economy the way it is and the policy, the government policies in terms of housing and rental prices, are you worried?
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Pen, is that you again?
I can answer that. I think our projections are based on what we experienced in the last 12 months. And I think 12 months ago, I think we wouldn't have necessarily forecast such a steep increase in homeless families. It's a really difficult thing to forecast and project for, but based on the current economic climate, lots of commentators around homelessness are suggesting that level of significant increase before a levelling out.
If I can.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, I was wondering whether there has been any, you mentioned about private landlords giving up renting out accommodation. And I just wonder whether that's, whether it's going to get even worse than we've seen over the last 12 months, and whether there is any research, or whether we as a council could like survey and see how many are thinking of giving it up, for example, whether that's useful.
Yeah, I think the landlord forum that I described earlier, we'll take a look at that work. The rent reforms bill that will soon become legislation is likely to see a change in the makeup of the private rented sector. It's difficult to know exactly how, but it could contract further as landlords may leave the market or move to short-term holiday lets, Airbnb type of accommodation, rather than letting out on a longer-term basis. And the rental reforms give more additional rights to tenants. Generally, there are some benefits in there for landlords too, but I think from a landlord perspective, there is probably nervousness in the market, and landlords that may be leaving the market, so it may well get worse before it gets better.
Thank you. Does that answer your question for you, Councillor Rice? Okay. Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I expect, like most councillors, I've had far more housing type casework than I've ever had before. From dealing with all this extra casework, I'm concerned about the increased demand on the service and the effect that it must be having on your staff. So I was wondering, what's the council doing to help staff cope with the pressures from the increased demand and prevent them being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of work? And I also wondered whether you've been able to employ more staff to help cope with this increased demand. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. So yes, staffing levels and coping with that. Is that you again?
It has been a really challenging year for the Housing Options Service. A year ago we were really very highly dependent on agency staff. Really pleased to say that that's not the case any longer, and we've had made some changes and adopted some strategies about how we promote and advertise roles in housing, and including a well-received apprenticeship programme. So we're training and developing people to provide more support work and expertise in terms of housing legislation, advice and assistance. With those pressures, and particularly with the families that do become homeless and spend time in temporary accommodation, the emotional support that families require as a result of that process means that the staff in the team are dealing with issues more frequently, that are more complicated, and that does create a pressure in itself. And we've commissioned some additional support for our service team managers and frontline staff around trauma-informed care and reflective supervision to ensure that they have the time that they need in order to be supported within the role, because it certainly in the last 12 months has become more challenging for the team.
Yeah, Jess, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and really to note my thanks to the housing team, because it is amazingly difficult the work they're doing, and the leadership team there, led by Ben, and the managers in that team have done a brilliant job of bringing in resource, but not only just bringing in officers to support, but making sure that training package is there for them and that they've got the support. And compared to a year ago, we're really seeing that difference in the morale of the team and how well the team are working.
Yeah, Kelly.
Just so you get the hat trick. I just wanted. I think Ben was being was being a little bit shy about the apprenticeship programme, and quite modest there really. And I just wanted to note that because I think it's really important that we acknowledge that this is a really rewarding profession. I came into exactly that job when I was 18 and working for the Borough of Poole, and I think Ben was there too. And actually, this is a really rewarding role, and one where there's an awful lot of support and some really innovative work that's happening around that apprenticeship piece. So with some volume and some great success. So I just wanted to note that, and also to say that we're looking at a sort of broader resilience programme across housing and communities for those frontline roles, because this impacts in Ben's area, but also another example might be our antisocial behaviour officers or our community safety patrol officers. They're all dealing with very difficult circumstances, and we've had some success with those programmes in the past. So we're looking at that and how we invest in that and in wellbeing.
Thank you. Councillor Moore, anything you want to follow up with? Anyone else? Councillor Devon.
Yes, thank you. And obviously I haven't had a chance to read this paper as fully as some people perhaps, but I'm just not concerned. I'm interested in on 11, you say of the 230 households in B&B at the moment, 100 are families, but that seems to leave an awful lot of people. Are we thinking that they're single people? I mean, can I just put a sort of point of view from Christchurch, that there are people that I know of who are elderly people whose landlord, as we're saying, oh, I think Airbnb is going to be more lucrative, or we want to get out of the market. Those single people, often pensioners, have terrible trouble moving into anywhere else. And I'm assuming that as well as the, the 230 households, 100 are families, there's 130 who are not families. So there must be a lot of work going on there.
Thank you. Ben?
Yep, so you're absolutely correct. There's 130 majority single people, often with additional needs, in addition to the fact that they haven't got a roof, that need an awful lot of support in the accommodation settled accommodation that they're seeking. Some of that support is provided in different supported housing settings, but a vast majority of it provided in independent accommodation with visiting support. Access to that is really challenging, particularly in the private rented sector. Finding an affordable solution is really challenging. And we're in touch with landlords and that landlord group again to try and procure as much as we can through as much incentives and offers to private landlords around supporting tenants and themselves as we can. It remains a really challenging piece for both families and the single person access accommodation.
Chairman, can I just come back?
Yeah, please.
Also, I was very pleased to find in another piece of the report that you're taking notice of the lived experience of people, which is really essential. So yeah, congratulations on that.
Thank you. And do you want to comment on that? Or I think the lived experience is really important and taking account of what everyone is going through. If you don't want to add anything into that.
Yeah, I mean, the BCP Homelessness Partnership has a subgroup called the Oracle Group. It's led by our colleagues who work for Shelter and St Mungo's. They do separate work with people with lived experience, with a range of different experiences of homelessness, from rough sleeping, from young people, and most recently have done some really fantastic work with families that are living in temporary accommodation. Some really rich information and learning from families that have spoken to the Oracle Group about how we can improve their experience when homeless in temporary accommodation, that the partnership will take forward and develop and continue to open that dialogue with people that are unfortunate enough to have to use temporary accommodation.
Thank you. Here we go. Councillor Herrick.
Hi. Sorry. One of the things that kind of concerns me, having read through the report, is that most of the bed and breakfast accommodation for families is how they're kind of going to feed themselves. Cooking facilities kind of range from the limited to the kettle, from what I've seen, and whilst I'm sure we all know someone who's kind of existed solely on pot noodles, I'm not sure that it's what families are kind of really looking for. So is there anything that we're doing to kind of support those families and make sure that they've got ability to kind of either cook or find kind of non-takeaway or limited options?
Great question. Thank you, Ben.
Okay, so the bed and breakfast that we use, we try to procure accommodation on bed and breakfast that have access to cooking facilities. Not all of them have full access to cooking facilities. It was one of the things that came up this week with the Homelessness Reduction Board Away Day, and a number of different partners have come together, and particularly within the Access to Food Partnership, agreed to develop an option to ensure that people and families in bed and breakfast have better access to food and cooking facilities where we can. So recognising that that's definitely an issue. The families that we've spoken to also recognising that that's an issue for some when they're in bed and breakfast for an extended period of time. But I think within the Access to Food Partnership, there'll be a really strong offer there for maintaining a reasonable, nutritious diet, even though you're in temporary accommodation.
Any follow on from that? I don't think we've got anyone else, so I'll ask. I think following on from that is, you said about trying to choose bed and breakfast where there's access to cooking equipment or at least ways that people can cook and look after themselves. Obviously, the access to food and everything like that is great, and there's some brilliant charities and individuals out there doing some fantastic work in that. And I think the BCP food map is definitely worth raising, that's accessible to everyone. But when you're looking at the accommodation, particularly the temporary accommodation, hostels, B&Bs and that, what is actually assessed when you're going and looking for these places? What is the standard that we're looking for? And how often is that checked to make sure that they are continuing to meet the standards which you want to have people in? Because I'm pretty sure most of us as councillors have had at least one resident come into us saying they're not happy with the temporary accommodation, or they feel like they're not safe in their temporary accommodation. You know, what safeguarding issues are, the things like that.
Thanks. So we don't get lots of choice in terms of our access to bed and breakfast and hotel accommodation across BCP. There's only a limited number of proprietors that want to work with us to provide homeless accommodation. The proprietors that do are required to sign up to standard terms in terms of health and safety standards with respect to the building, security, access to management staff within the hotel. My team are within those hotels every single day in terms of supporting different families and households, and there is a 8 weekly check of service standards within the hotel that a member of my team carries out, and that's with respect to the health and safety of the building and also the services that are provided there by the hotel.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Sort of on the safeguarding thing that Councillor Rigby mentioned, with sort of a couple of questions. With families that are going into B&Bs, do they tend to be in separate accommodation to sort of single people, or if there's areas where there's shared communal facilities, are there additional safeguarding checks as to like the other occupants who might be mixing with families? Or can you talk me through anything like that? Cheers.
So we don't block book hotel accommodation for families. The accommodation, all temporary accommodation that is used in hotels and bed and breakfasts is either used for single people or couples, or it's used for families. We don't place single people and families in the same accommodation. So they are kept very separate. There are different risks that we need to manage and safeguarding issues across both a range of different household groups, and also often within families themselves will require a specific type of accommodation that is better, they may better cater for young families, for example. So we have a number of proprietors that cater better for young families.
Councillor Adams, anything further on that?
No, that's great, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Northover.
Just sort of following the same lines, really. I wondered if you could tell us more about what the actual accommodation is like. For instance, do they have a shared toilet and bathroom, or do they have their own?
Yeah, so the vast majority of the hotels have ensuite facilities. There are some hotels that families do use that do have shared, but there's only 1 or 2 of those out of about 20 different establishments. So vast majority it's ensuite. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Moore.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, if I can go into a bit more detail on that, if I may. I always worry whether or not a B&B is suitable for children. And of course the needs of children will vary with the age of the child. So some accommodation might be suitable for a 6-year-old, but it wouldn't be suitable for a baby under 12 months, for example. So I just wondered, you know, I assume the accommodation is checked out before being allocated, but who carries out the checks and makes the decisions that they're suitable for that particular age of child? And are there sort of like national standards for B&B type accommodation? And, you know, how does the council comply with them? Thanks.
Okay, so there are no national standards with respect to this. What we do have, though, is a recognition that an ensuite room with a shower isn't going to be very helpful for a parent and a baby. What we try to do where we can is ensure that all younger children have access to a bath within their ensuite facilities. Most of the time that's possible, but it's not always, but we do our best to move families to rooms where that is available. There's, as I say, a service manager within my team that is responsible for checking the condition, cleanliness, etc., and that service standard piece to ensure that the standard of family accommodation, bed and breakfast, is a reasonable one and is our point of escalation for any families that are having some challenges around that.
Anything further?
I was just going to say, if the family moved in and the child, the parents were worried that the child didn't, you know, they couldn't access the a bathroom, or I've had a case, I expect you know, where the facilities were along a corridor, and they can't manage. So are they allowed to, you know, tell you about it and at the first opportunity be able to be moved on to something more suitable? Because they always worry, if I say no, are they going to be thrown out? Well, I mean, you're not going to do that, but you know, they obviously worry that that's what's going to happen. So just to reassure me. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and absolutely the team do absolutely their best to ensure that accommodation, that temporary accommodation and particularly ensuite facilities are within the same space. But need to be honest that they are, sometimes that does not happen, and sometimes families do have to wait a longer period of time than we would all like in order to get that access to the accommodation. And it's part of the service pressures that we've got at the moment around accessing suitable temporary accommodation and long term too.
Thank you. No, please.
I just wanted to add, because the team very kindly have taken me out. One of the things I do regularly in my role, and so does Kelly, is go out with frontline teams and understand what's going on and actually go around some of that accommodation. So absolutely hear your concerns and can reassure you from the tours that I've done in a number of the B&Bs and in temporary accommodations and supported accommodation as well. Actually, you know, the standard is as good as we can make it, and the team work really hard to be as responsive as possible to those to our customers and those people in need. But you know, it is very interesting going out to see the challenge. You know, and it does really bring to life actually how difficult it is for people living in temporary accommodation, particularly families.
Kelly.
Sorry, I just wanted just reflecting as sort of listening to the conversation and the responses, and you know, I would just, it goes without saying that bed and breakfast is never suitable. We don't ever want to be in that situation where we're having to place families, and there's been times in the past where we've had, you know, the opportunity to prevent successfully before a situation even gets to that position. You know, we are just overwhelmed by the amount of demand at the moment, but there is on either side of the bed and breakfast scenario a really huge amount of work and success that happens in terms of prevention, and I just want to sort of give a bit of reassurance around that, and also then in terms of the move on. What we need to do though is more of both and less of the bit in the middle. It probably goes with an obvious statement to make, but it's all part of that picture.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Doughton Gibson next. Oh, can you put your microphone?
Sorry, forgot the mic. Do you use winterlets, self-contained holiday accommodations that typically comes for months over the winter? I just wondered whether that's an area that we've looked at using, because obviously that would give them self-contained accommodation with cooking facilities.
We've explored lots of opportunities to do that with lots of different landlords, and we haven't found opportunities to secure winter lets, but it's certainly something that yeah, I'll take away from today and explore further, because I think there may be opportunity there to reduce bed and breakfast use and provide a more self-contained offer that may be more suitable for families, certainly.
Can I follow on that? Part of my reason for my question is actually one of the provisions in the Renters Reform Act gets rid of ground 3, the winter let ground. So essentially landlords, potentially holiday let landlords won't be able to winter let because they'll have no way to get the property back. So they may become more available.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dedman.
It was just to follow on from Councillor Moore's point that you're talking about facilities and bathrooms and en-suites, but you also say that you've got hostel accommodation, and I don't feel that that's ever, I mean, has that ever got en-suites and all that? I know people who have said they would prefer to rough sleep than go in a hostel. Now, this is usually young men, obviously. I say obviously, that's very not true at all. Young people, but yeah, they would prefer not to be housed than go into hostels. And yet, I see in 15 that or 16 it is. You also have shared hostels, 43 rooms. I mean, is that only for single people? That wouldn't be families.
So those 43 rooms are spread across 3 buildings within BCP, and they're exclusively for families. So yeah, so within those buildings, there are individual bedrooms, and then on 2 or 3 floors, bathroom facilities on each floor that 2, 3 families will share.
Any follow-up on that?
Can I just come back on that to a specific point, that in our area, one of those particular types of hotel hostelry type things is going. So are we going to be short of that accommodation? I'm talking specifically of in Muddyford, which is where I've got my ward.
So I'm not sure I know specifically about the property that you're talking about. I think what I'd say is that the feedback that we've had from families that are using those hostel facilities is generally positive in terms of their experience, but an acknowledgement that they are stressful places to live. It's difficult to share facilities. It's difficult to do laundry, cook, wash when you have childcare responsibilities. So I think we're recognising those challenges, and the absolute preference around provision of temporary accommodation where we have to provide it is that it's provided within self-contained accommodation. Hopefully towards the end of the summer, early autumn, we'll have new accommodation that will be opening in Herbert Avenue in Poole, 24 units of self-contained accommodation with an on-site support provision, and it will be exclusively for families. We know, and we're providing that kind of accommodation because we know that families need self-contained accommodation, be it temporary or otherwise. But I think that provides a very helpful model moving forward that we probably need to do more of.
Yeah, Kelly.
Thank you. Just to add to that, and coming back to the lived experience position that we talked about when we had the Homeless Reduction Board away day on Monday, we heard about some specific feedback from Shelter in terms of and the Oracle Group in relation to the experience of living in a shared hostel, and there was a focus on what the challenges and the difficulties are there, but also what works. Acknowledging that that's a necessary part of the picture, and so in terms of there's obviously a priority in terms of securing more accommodation. There's also what we can do to make what we've got work better. So that will absolutely be a focus of the action plan that's being developed at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Harry.
Sorry, just coming back to the Herbert Avenue thing, was it 23 units that are coming, or 24 units, sorry. Obviously in the report it says we need 120, Is that year on year? So is that 120 every year? And if so, do we have a pipeline beyond the 24, sorry?
So the numbers in the report, that's correct. There's 24 or 120 required each year, each and every year. So that's what we're forecasting based on our increased demands. The Council House new build and acquisition strategy outlines the council's position with respect to new build delivery, of which a significant proportion will be to address the needs of families and single people that require temporary accommodation.
All right, thank you. I think we can give you a break for a second because that takes us nicely on to something that I wanted to ask Councillor Wilson about. This is about, in paragraph 25, it says here, to end the use of B&Bs, 230 new homes are required overall, 100 of which will be required for family demand. In addition, a net total of 120 homes per annum is required to meet an ongoing forecasted demand. And if we go back to what I opened with at the start, that's about how most people are finding their way into being in this situation at the minute, which is the end of private rented tenancies. So I was wondering what the plans for the portfolio holder are on council housing, so social housing, which is affordable, proper social housing, not affordable housing built as part of development, but actually council built, council owned, council operated, so we can control that. Councillor Wilson, have you got anything you want to add?
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I mean, I've just been here listening to a very interesting kind of questioning, and I think one thing that's given me a lot of reassurance is how good my officers are, and they've made tonight quite nice for me currently. But yeah, in terms of social rent and in terms of council building, council house building, that's a huge priority for us. I think Kelly and Ben already know my feelings towards social rent and towards getting stuff built. I think it's going to be challenging. I think there is a kind of a buy off with it. That if we want to deliver more homes, like building a social rent decreases the viability of a project, so we have to bear that in mind. But social rent is definitely a way forward. I think this is something that is nationally big. People are crying out for. I was at Manchester 2023, the housing conference, and one of the Daily Telegraph commentators, he's naturally quite right-leaning in his thoughts around housing, but he was crying out for the government to build social housing. So I think we need to be certainly keen on it. And I think in general we need to take a holistic approach to housing. Homelessness and people living in temporary accommodation is ultimately a failing of sector. The different pressures, we need to get every aspect of housing correct in order to reduce temporary accommodation. So yeah, I mean, definitely something that we're going to be working through, and we'll have more plans to you soon, I'm sure.
And Jess, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think it's really, I wanted to emphasise that the CNAS programme, our house delivery programme, is really driving that, and I completely and trying to support Kieran in terms of Councillor Wilson in terms of that delivery of the social housing. I think we've got to remember the demand though is for absolutely social rent, but it's also for key worker housing, it is for private rented sector housing, and it is also for owner occupier housing. And we've got to make sure we're delivering that diverse range of housing supply. That's not necessarily just to be built by that council. The council, absolutely rightly should be focusing on the affordable side, so the social side of things. But we need to make sure, and we've got Steve Dring in the room actually, in terms of where we drive the local plan, where things find that we're able to deliver regeneration that provides that mixed model of housing to meet all of our community's needs, so that we are in that very prevention space, and those people that we don't ever expect to be homeless don't end up as being homeless.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
A couple of questions leading on from that. I was wondering whether the economic development team within the council are involved in, and future places are involved in reducing homelessness. The reason for asking that is because in my general discussions, and then following on from what you've just said, Jess, about the mix of housing, I've never really understood why we need to focus on a mix of housing. I would have thought that if we provide more and more and more social housing, then it frees up other people to move out of private rented into social, which would give them, like, there's an awful lot of people in private rental at the moment that are financially stressed and would benefit from being in social housing, even if they're not on the social housing waiting list. There would be, I imagine, huge numbers of families that would want to move into social housing and out of private rented. So I don't see why we have a concern, for example, with the local plan, about making sure there's a mix of housing provided, because I'm not sure that's going to help reduce homelessness.
I'm not sorry. Could you be specific about what your question is? Sorry.
Well, there was two questions. Are the economic development team involved in reducing homelessness? Because if it's a council policy, then the economic development team should be focused on what can they do to reduce homelessness. And the second question is, what is the local plan doing to reduce homelessness? And third question is, are we absolutely certain as a council that providing a mix of housing with the local plan is going to reduce homelessness? Have we got evidence of that sort of thing?
Is that clear enough?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of your first question, the economic development team don't work on housing needs. They work in terms of, they are very much focused on building skills, working with businesses, about growing the local economy. So they're very much more focused around the jobs and businesses and local economy opportunity. They aren't involved in house building, though they will be. They do liaise absolutely with the regeneration team if it's about meanwhile use and those sorts of things. So no, economic development team aren't around house building. In terms of your question around the local plan is doing a housing needs assessment and understanding what the future need for housing supply across the whole of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole area is, and that's across all of the need base. We've got the expert in the room, so I'm waiting for him to shake his head at me and say Jess is saying the wrong things. But that needs assessment will absolutely consider what's the need, what's a long-term need when you look at our demographics, when you look at the population change that we're expecting. So whether that's population growth, whether that's immigration, whether that's the aging population, what the housing need is. So is that supported living? Is that temporary accommodation? Is that private renter sector? Is that owner occupier? Is that social housing? And that will give us a perspective on where all those needs are. In terms of the question around why do we need more private rented sector, why don't we just build loads of social housing and move people out of the private rented sector into social housing, both of those could be subsidised. So actually there are people that can absolutely afford private rented and live in that. It is expensive. The more houses we build, the more we can create a marketplace where we can reduce that private rented sector costs and the rent, because the market won't be so challenging and people won't be able to increase the rents. That is a long-term thing because you need a lot of houses to change that. People moving, the social housing is it's for an element of the population that require that support to be able to live in those houses, and that is needed. But there's also there are also people that want to live in private rented, and there's also people who want to be owner occupiers or be supported to own part of their house and then go on to own their house. So actually that mix is really important. And then the added bit on there, which is adding that complexity, is the viability of schemes. We are seeing that construction material costs are going up, land prices are going up. All of those things make viability more difficult. And actually, by having a mixed scheme, you can make a scheme viable in terms of financial sustainability. And that's where I think you mentioned Future Places. They will talk about their regeneration sites and talk about a stewardship model, which is trying to look at the future financial sustainability of some of the larger brownfield development opportunities we've got in BCP, and to make them viable, not only financially to do the development, but in the longer term to meet community needs, to be able to have the right infrastructure, to be able to be sustainable for that longer term. So I hope that it would take a long time to answer that question in detail, because it is a really, really complicated piece. But I hope that gives you a bit of a high level response.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I think we're in danger of slipping slightly into the next paper with this sort of stuff around the local plan and that, so it may be better to refocus a little bit if you want to just come back on that shot quickly.
Yeah, okay, quickly. I suppose I've heard a lot over the last 4 years about if we build just any housing, then that will sort of bring house prices down, or it will free up. It will make it easier to be in the private renter, and that would help with social. But I can't see why it's just easier to just build as much social housing as possible, and that would get us to where we want to be much faster and much more reliably than relying on a private sector. But if there's, I'm interested in if there's any evidence that this is actually working, because countries that I've heard that are doing well with homelessness focus very much on social housing. So I'm just unsure about that direction being evidence-based, I suppose. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I don't know if you want to come back on that at all, if we're happy. And Councillor Wilson, you've got your hand up.
Cheers, thank you. Just to come in on this slightly, it's just around I agree with where Councillor Rice is coming from, and I think that this is really a national issue as much as anything. We haven't done enough over the last 4 decades in terms of building houses or social houses, and I think one of the things that I want to do in the next 4 years is feed into our MPs, all party parliamentary groups, different opportunities to try and get that national debate talking as well, because we need to be doing more as a country. I think we're going to try everything we can locally in terms of getting social housing. In some cases, we might be able to get say a set development. We might be able to get more homes in a development if we go for affordable rather than social. That's still capped at local housing allowance, and some of the people on our waiting list on our registers or in temporary accommodation would prefer that we got that done quicker. There was more homes, people coming off the register and coming out of temporary accommodation at a quicker time than having their rent slightly cheaper. I think so. It's a tough one, but yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from, and I think yeah. That's it, really. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We've probably got about 10 minutes left on this paper. If anyone who's not spoken wants to bring anything up which is unrelated to what we've been discussing, any other bits and points from the paper, now would be a good time to do it. Councillor Devon, I can see you sneaking a hand up there.
Well, I have spoken, obviously, but I just wanted to say that after that very long and involved explanation, which was very, very good, but there are loads and loads of other things to bring in. If you want to drag the whole thing in, one of my favourite conundrums is that we keep elderly people who are in need of care in their own homes. Now, I just put that into the mix, because if you want to shred everything, you know, where I come from in Christchurch, there are rows and rows of bungalows, and I obviously, probably lucky I'm not standing again, because I won't get the votes now, but people are in those bungalows who maybe, you know, could be somewhere else. So I think all of those things, as the Councillor Rice is saying, there is so much to put in this mix. The other thing about, we're bleeding on to the next paper now, about planning, is you build and build and build, but you can't stop landlords doing Airbnb, again in Christchurch, so many of those. Or having second homes, nothing wrong with all that. You know, freedom is fine, but it doesn't help when you're trying to house people. And I think I'd just like to say that I really admire the work that all of you do, and there's so much to it. So well done. Thank you, Jess, for that explanation. You need to get on to the next bits now. Thank you.
And Councillor Doughton-Gibson.
Under Bournemouth Council, when I was a councillor before, one of the things they offered was the chance for councillors to go out with the homelessness team in the morning, which I have to say is probably the most amazing thing to do. Not to mention, despite Councillor Dedman's comment, I remember one lady in Westover Road asleep in her sleeping bag under the scaffolding, as it was then. To my amazement, the lady taking us round said, no, we're paying for B&B for her and she's still sleeping on the street. And I think what that also shows is that actually, certainly the street homeless, as opposed to a lot of what we've been talking about, is a much more complex problem to cure than housing. Housing wasn't the issue for that lady. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of mental health issues, addiction issues. This is why they don't like the hostels, because they're very constrained. And I just wondered whether that would be something that could be offered if people wanted again. It was certainly very enlightening.
That's a fair question. Would you be willing to having councillors coming out and sit in the front line with the team?
Yeah, I'm very welcome. We work every day with St Mungo's, the Rush Sleeper outreach team, and they host visitors whenever you feel that would be appropriate. But also some of our bed and breakfasts and family hostels, also an open invitation to come and visit and see the facilities and see how those work too.
I'd really encourage you to do that, because I too have been out with the team, and it's really it's rewarding and it's eye-opening and it's very educational.
Okay.
And it's a very early start. But yes, it's very rewarding and it really is worthwhile.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to have the last word on this? No, in that case, what can I ask you, in case people are faced with homelessness or are worried about it, what's the best way to get in touch with the council? What would be the best route for them to go? What, is the direct phone number to come through to your team? Email? How, if people were struggling or worried, what would be the best way to get in touch with you all?
Yep, so the fastest way is via email, so that's BCP Housing Advice at BCP Council, or there's a phone line that is managed by the customer team. That's the quickest way, and a duty team available every day. So emergencies are dealt with on the day, otherwise home visits, telephone appointments, or visits within the community settings too. So ranged phone or email is the quickest way.
Kelly?
Just to say, it's just the plug about making sure that people come to us as soon as they're aware that there's an issue, that there's evidence that supports time and time again that we have a much better chance of preventing homelessness when we can intervene early. So reach out and get that support. It is there.
Thank you. Councillor Rice, quickly have the last word.
I just wondered whether we could ask the portfolio holder to feedback in like 6 months or a year about sort of the efforts he's making at parliamentary level, well, at like government level. That'd be interesting.
Kieran, Councillor Wilson, would you be happy to do that?
Yeah, more than happy. Yeah.
Okay, so if you can feed back to us and we can maybe not do it as an item, but maybe have an update which at the start of one of our meetings and say 9 months, 12 months time, something like that, that'd be great. Okay, on that note, I think we can close this item. Thank you very much to the officers for coming in. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I know you're not in Bournemouth at the moment, so thanks for coming and joining us this evening. It's appreciated.
Cheers. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. This is really important work, and I'm really glad that we've got to have a little dive into it and get a briefing on it. And we look forward to hearing more as your term progresses. On that, we can move on to item 7. There's a bit of reshuffling going on in the room, so I'll fill some dead air rather than leaving it that way. The next paper is on planning reforms, and we've got Steve Drink, who's the interim planning policy manager, who will be introducing this for us. Steve, you're just getting settled, so I won't call on you immediately. But if you're about ready and you want to introduce the paper, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that okay? Can you hear me properly? Okay, so just do a very quick intro, just to say we responded, well, government has produced some planning reforms. We did a response that we took to Cabinet in February. We're very supportive of the government planning reforms. It's going to lead to a new a quicker local plan system. We're supposed to do a local plan within 30 months. Well, how many years into BCP are we now? We still haven't got a local plan under the old system. So under the new system, we can do it in 30 months, apparently, although I'll wait to see how that actually works in practice. Standardization of some things, such as the way we deal with development management policies, a number of other things in there that are really good. There's other stuff such as infrastructure levy. It's quite a wide number of reforms. So it was difficult in terms of what we concentrated on tonight. One of the main things I think that comes out of the planning reforms, it puts the focus back on us, that we've got, as a local authority, we've got more power in negotiation with developers, whereas in the past we've always been on the back foot. So this will give us much better powers, I would say. So that's good. And so generally supportive of it. I mean, the main change to us that was coming through the reforms was the fact that government promised to change the MPPF, just to tweak a few things. It wouldn't require legislation. It was just a consultation. The consultation would end, and then they'd change the MPPF to say that we could protect Greenbelt. We wouldn't have to release Greenbelt to meet housing need. And that was seen by politicians as quite an important change, that we wouldn't have to just build everywhere outside in the Greenbelt. Because our housing need as well, we've identified our own local housing need, which we think is different to the standard methodology, much lower. And the new changes to the MPPF would allow us to use that locally derived housing need as our starting point. So that is quite a positive. So we need the changes made to the MPPF. They were supposed to come out in spring. They haven't materialised. We're now hearing the autumn is the next time that will happen. So hopefully they will happen. The local plan is kind of reliant on that. So we wait to see where that goes. But the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is the main piece of legislation that came through the planning reforms. That's also delayed. It's coming through. We'll hopefully hear again in the autumn about that. One of the main things through that for us is about what water treatment companies dealing with the phosphates in River Avon, the phosphates in Poole Harbour, which is also holding up development. So that would be important changes coming through that paper, as well as all the changes to the quicker new local plan system. That said, we're trying to move our local plan forward through the old planning system because we've come so far as we have, and we need to get it adopted as soon as possible. So as I said, there's quite a lot we could talk about. I had a quick chat to the chairman, and we decided we'd concentrate on sort of the climate change side and sustainable homes. So that's what the paper focuses on. Now, actually, the Levelling Up Regeneration Bill doesn't actually provide much of a help or a clear steer on how we meet net zero by 2050. So again, it's up to us through the local plan to try and do what we can, push the limits to see if we can try and force developers to do more by setting policies that go beyond building regs and go beyond national policy. One of the main things, of course, we try and do, and by not having to go out into the green belt, if that option is allowed, we can go for urban regeneration, is to try and focus all developments in most sustainable locations, who have walkable neighbourhoods. And if any of you came along to the briefing with councillors last week and the workshops, we were looking at every community within BCP area and seeing how we could turn that into a walkable neighbourhood and with good access to public transport to the wider services that are needed. So people can go daily to the things they need to do on a daily basis without having to get in a car. So that is a very important way of the local plan going forward, really looking at a sort of very localised level to try and make that work, and where there's opportunities, look at linking development to those opportunities. Also avoiding areas of flood risk, looking at more urban greening and sustainable construction. So there's a number of things we can do. In terms of sustainable construction, we've got Future Home Standard coming out in 2025, which is through the building regs. And when that does come out through the building regs, it will require developers to make homes 75 to 80% less CO2 emissions, which makes them net carbon, I'll get the right phrase word, is it net carbon ready or net zero ready? Net zero ready or carbon zero ready. Forgotten the phrase. Net zero ready homes. There you go. Net zero ready homes. The reason it's only 75 to 80% is that the national grid still isn't reached a point where it's going to be all renewable energy. But once the national grid is 100% renewable energy, those homes will then be 100% CO2 emission renewable, reduction in CO2 emissions. So renewable, sustainable, I mean. In terms of the 2025 Future Home Standard, that's coming, like I say, coming in 2025. That's when the local plan is going to be adopted. So we're working on the basis that as soon as the plan adopts, those new housing standards will be in place. Now, if we were to try and do that in advance of the building regs, the actual costs on building is £6,000 for a flat and £9,000 for a house to upgrade those homes to make them net zero ready home. Get that right again. But the likelihood of us being able to do that before the local plan comes through is very little. We need a local plan. That's what set the policies. It comes out in 2025. So it'll be done through the Future Home Standard anyway. So what we're saying is it's best to wait, I think, for that. But one of the main issues we've got with trying to push building regs further and pushing government policy further is the viability issues. We're being told by our consultants that viability is very poor in the area at the moment. The high build costs over the last year or two and since the pandemic have really made a big difference. There's still a lot of land trading at high land values in this area, which makes it very hard to actually get any profitability. So that's why the number of homes built has really reduced over the last few years. Only 700 homes last year compared to our target of about 1,700. So very low house building rate at the moment. We've got to try and get the market moving again, whilst also trying to push the limits of what we can do in terms of additional policy costs to try and build sustainable homes. So there's a bit of a balance to do, because we also need developers to provide us with some money, the money that we can then use to provide flood defences that we also need to help BCP adapt to climate change. So there's a lot of things we have to balance at the moment. One of them being what we can do in terms of sustainable construction. So that's kind of my intro. I imagine there's a lot of different avenues we can explore with this around the local plan. I'm totally open to any questions. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks very much. That was a really detailed introduction and a really detailed paper as well. I know how busy you are at the moment as well. So thanks for pulling this together for us. And just to extend our thanks as well in public for the workshop that we had last week as well. I found that, and everyone I spoke to found that really, really beneficial. And it was really good to have that ward detail and go into that as well. I'm going to throw this straight open to the committee. If anyone would like to go first, Councillor Dedman.
I've got one of those questions that shows I've never been listening to anything that anybody's said. This levelling up to what from what? Is it the whole country or an area? What are we levelling up to?
Steve?
Now we're straight into national politics. It's levelling up the whole country. Levelling up the whole country in theory to make it fair for everybody.
So start with the broad question and then start narrowing it down from there, yeah? Councillor Doughton-Gibson, you asked for this to be put on the agenda originally, so do you want to take the lead on this one? Start.
I completely take your point and understand the issues about. I'll use the word the reticence of developers to spend any more money than they have to. I sat for 7 years as one of the directors on Bournemouth Development Company, and the way development works is that you say, well, the GDV, the gross development value, is going to be this much. It'll cost us this much to build. We want this much profit, and that's what we can pay for the land. So I do understand that there are limits, although it should fall through to the land. I think there are things, though. I take your point on your 6,000 to 9,000. I'd be fascinated to know what's included in that build cost, because a figure is pretty meaningless without that. But for example, if you put in a consumer unit, which is what most people would call a fuse board, that had, say, 5 spare slots, you've probably saved the future householder £1,000 if they have to upgrade the consumer unit to put in solar, a car charger and a battery, for example. And yet it would only cost the developer, still got to wire the same wires in there, but it's only going to cost him. I looked it up in research for this, and the difference between, say, a 10 and a 20 unit is about £100. And, and yet when you go and say, I want a car charger, it's going to cost you £1,000, and they come and do all the inspections and they go, oh, we've got to change your consumer unit. That'll cost you another £1,000. So, you've literally, just by that one very simple change, which cost the developer £100, they literally wouldn't even notice it. So there are things we could do. And in a similar vein, I wondered whether we could consider, it's a slightly different issue, not so much around energy, but still very much about the environment. There's a big focus on trying to reduce the amount of sewerage that we're dumping in the sea these days, particularly when it rains heavily. Nobody should be more interested than that than people whose sort of area relies on its beach and tourism. But again, if we got developers to run separate surface and foul water to their boundary, actually it might not happen for 5 or 10 years, you know, whatever it would be, 10 lengths of 110 mil pipe would be nothing. And yet if we chose to have a separate rainwater collection, it could then just pick up from the road and you wouldn't be digging everybody's drive up. So it becomes possible to do it in the future. And obviously over the years, as more and more sites got redeveloped, you would have a more and more viable scheme. And I just wonder, you know, they don't have to be big expensive things that can make that difference.
Thank you. So yeah, I guess that question is based around the future proofing and what small cost things could we build into the local plan, which may not make a big difference, but can have benefits in the future for the homeowner and also the area as well.
Just on the first one, they're both really good points, and I must admit I haven't considered them. But on the first one, I would say we do currently require all new homes to provide electric car charging points. So I'm just wondering whether the fuse board is linked to that as part of that piece of work or not. I've no idea, and
I'll give you the answer. Yes, you'll need a slot on the fuse board for a car charger. A home car charger runs at 7.6 kilowatts, 32 amps, so it needs its own circuit. But you would also need a separate one for solar. If you have a battery, you need one. Hence why you need sort of 4 or 5 extra.
It would make sense that you do it all at the same time, like you say, for the minimum cost, wouldn't it? And that's something I've certainly noted that down to look at. In terms of the second one, can you explain what you mean again by collecting the water?
Okay, at the moment, in some areas we want SUDs. In other words, if we can have sustainable drainage and we put it into the land, that's the best solution. But we also have cliff edge areas where we don't want to put it into sustainable drainage because it will only risk eroding the cliffs more if we're pouring a lot of water into the soil. So in those areas, we don't really want it. But what I'm suggesting is that at the moment, we just put it in the foul water system. And it's actually, that's the problem, is that we're putting the rainwater into the foul water sewer. If we made all new developments run 2 pipes to the boundary, we would have the option at any point in the future of running a surface water drain down the road and picking up all the surface waters separately that could be discharged without treatment in the same way, and then we wouldn't have all the sewage going in the sea. And it would be a tiny little change. They're already digging a trench down to the road. You just put 2 pipes in it, not 1.
Thanks, Steve.
I was going to say all 3 pipes because something we're also looking at is in terms of 5G as well. I think putting the ducting in new houses, that's one of the other things that we're looking at. Yeah, in terms of that, just say on cliff tops, we're looking at cliff top management areas as well through the flood risk team. So I don't know the detail of what's included in this and whether that's been considered. I'll have to ask them. Right.
Thank you. Councillor Northover.
Thank you. Are you still typing? I did mention to you the other night, and I think you just said again something that's sort of confusing me, that the idea is to focus building in communities that are sustainable already. And I think we should focus on making other communities sustainable through building, because I think there's a big risk of making sustainable communities unsustainable by overwhelming them with such a dense population that they start to struggle, and also that we then lose family housing because there's a lot of that comes from maybe 4-bedroom houses being turned into two-bedroom houses. So that's another way that they become less sustainable. And I wondered if that is actually what you mean when you said that, or if you think I'm right or wrong. Thanks.
The workshops have been really useful actually, because what we started from the point of view of looking at which were the most sustainable neighbourhoods and then saying that should be the focus of development. But of course we're planning for the future. So what we should be doing is looking at every community and seeing what those communities are missing in terms of, walkable neighbourhoods or bus links being the main one really, to get people around in a sustainable way so they don't have to travel by car. So we're kind of developing that now from the workshops onwards to looking at every community and saying, well, there's a community centre, this is what we need to try and do, what do we need, what is missing, what can we do to make that better? And actually development can actually provide better facilities. So for example, Bearwood and Merley, we've got there's 2 urban extensions there that can, well, three extensions actually, that are going to provide a bus service, bus subsidy. There isn't currently a good enough bus service. So it's then, where does that bus service go? We've got the money for it. Now where are we going to direct it? Where do people want to go? Because we could put that bus in a number of different directions, to Bournemouth Town Centre, to Poole Town Centre, etc. So we're trying to work with that community and say, well, now how do we make this better? You've got all this housing coming. How can we make this better? And also looking at, an allocation there for a care home. Well, care homes aren't popular anymore since COVID. There's not an increase in care homes. So we're looking at, well, should we increase that to make it extra care, so that people who want to downsize to free up a market home in that area would do so and move into extra care and stay within their community. So we're trying to look at other ways of doing this. So looking at all communities, what's missing, what can we do to improve it? Ultimately, we need to protect as many family homes as we can. Sorry.
No, I was just going to. Sorry, Chair. I just want to say the team have got, very kindly demonstrated to me the other day, how we're using that data and mapping. And so what is absolutely fascinating, so I'm not going to give you the answer to the question, but what is absolutely fascinating is we've got the data that allows them to say, okay, well, if we added a bus route here, if we added a school here, how would this have an impact on the area? Actually, if we increased housing here. And so they are able to map out and use that data and I guess that's technology, isn't it? So the system, whatever it is, the map, that I just go, wow, that's amazing. That just helps us actually start visualizing it and seeing that impact. So actually the thoroughness of the work that we're now able to do to really help us decide what the policy then needs to say is really strong. And I've been really impressed with it.
And just to add to that, one of my hopes is that all service providers will use that going forward, because they'd start to see, say we're looking to close a community hall, someone to close a community hall to build some houses. Well, it's the only community hall you see within a neighbourhood, because you can actually see it mapped out as how people are using it and the walkable distance to it. Take that away, that's increasing trips. All those kind of things. If you close the pub, if you close the shop, all those kind of things that will be important. So hopefully that'll give us the data to properly plan to protect, because we're always under pressure to lose the lower value uses to housing. That's the first thing. But secondly, to plan to create more. Money, of course, is the biggest problem. How do you get new buses and all those? Have we answered your question in there? But it is a developing idea that we're going for.
Sort of, but I think you're kind of missing the point really, in that you don't need to subsidise a bus if there's enough population that it makes. If you look at the end of my road, I can get the M2 every 3 minutes because it's going along that corridor that's got a really high population, and so I think other areas in BCP would benefit. It doesn't have to be seen as such a negative thing to have a little bit more population, because that's how you have that's proper sustainable shops, a school that's not shutting because they haven't got enough kids. That it all comes together. I don't think you need to be thinking about trying to subsidise a bus service or a shop or or trying to keep a community centre open. If you've got enough people going there, these things work out anyway.
Yeah, can I try and summarise that a little bit? I think where you're going, Councillor Northover, is like if you've got places like, say, Bournemouth Town Centre, which has high targets for new developments over the next 10 years in the local plan, like probably Poole Town Centre, Boscombe, areas like this, and then you've got the more outside areas which have lower population densities, maybe more suburban type family housing, which have much lower targets for housing. Is it more sustainable to continue to develop in the already high density areas, or is it better to increase the urban density outwards a little bit and then increase the numbers of pubs, community centres, shops, bus routes run out there and make them naturally more sustainable areas in themselves, rather than people having to travel into the town centres and the district centres? Is that kind of where you're going with that?
And that's kind of what I was trying to say we're trying to do. I mean, the focus has to be on the town centres for the most development, because already the facilities are there. next to train stations, all of those kind of things. You've got the facilities there, but we need to then extend, if you remember the map that we showed you with the red, it's extending those red areas out into all the suburban communities, trying to get high frequency buses. So like I was saying, the Bearwood and Merley example being that example, the moment you look at the map, it's coloured white we want to get a red, it's got access to open space now, it's got access to better shops, the new local centre, it's got, the development will also bring the bus route. So all those things will suddenly score it up and it will become a red area. And it's trying to do that everywhere else. It's very difficult in terms of the number of homes you can get built because there's obviously limited opportunities. But around local centres, we've identified what we call local opportunity areas where we're trying to see a little bit of an increase in, saying to a developer or to residents who live there, this street, it's currently 1-storey bungalows next to some shops. If this was now 3-storey townhouses, you get much higher density in here. A lot more people in a smaller area can walk to the shop. And if there was a bus route now, there's a lot more people right next to a bus stop to create a better bus service. So that's what we're trying to do. So I think we're trying to do what you're saying.
I think it's just the way round you're explaining it is that you're talking about putting services almost, I'm thinking do it through population rather than needing to put services there to try and attract people. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? But if we can move on, Councillor Chapman Law, welcome for joining us this evening. And yeah, you've got a question.
Good evening. I have spent a lot of time working on building sites in my time as a security engineer, and the builders were always looking at ways to find an extra pound here and there. It was quite difficult to convince them to spend that little bit extra for a long-term benefit. But what I've been sort of researching a lot over the last few years is that a lot of the renewable tech and the greener ways of building are actually cheaper than the traditional way. Like wood frame, timber frame, that kind of thing. But also, I do wonder if the 10% renewable energy proposals on buildings is a little bit on the low side, especially when you consider that if you put solar on a roof when it's being built, you put it in the roof, so then you're not having to put tiles on that roof, which then, so the actual net cost is very little different between putting the tiles on anyway. So I think we should be putting a little bit more pressure on builders to do the right thing, and at least, even if they just put the solar on the roof, cable to an isolator, and then let the customer do what they want to do with that, be that batteries, etc. But yeah, I think the solar on the roof in the first instance is quite a bit expense to do afterwards, in a similar way to Councillor, sorry, I've forgotten your name. I can't pronounce it anyway. Sorry. D-Dog, yes. The D-Dog. Where I've completely lost my train of thought now. Yeah, so that's basically it really, is we need to be putting pressure on them to at least supply the basics of the renewable tech.
Can I just add a little bit to that before you come back, Stephen, and answer? I'll put my cards on the table now. So years ago, I won't say how many years ago, when I done my dissertation, I actually did it on making houses net zero and the use of renewable technologies and energy saving to do so, the additional cost and the cost savings then on top of the bills as well, and that whether that can affect mortgages which people can get on properties. So I think it's coming from the same place. Is there an argument to say that if we are providing these net zero ready houses now, that actually they could be more affordable because people could take out a higher mortgage on them? Is this work being done anywhere that you know of, or either in-house or externally, on not just the future proofing, but what is in the affordability and the future affordability as well?
Good question. I need to see this dissertation. If it does make it more affordable that way, I mean, yes, because the idea, of course, is that the bills will go down. We're not we get rid of fossil fuel poverty, isn't it? That people that have the new people moving into a house will be stuck with fossil fuels. They've got a carbon zero. I'm going to get ready. Zero ready home. I still can't get it right. I just got to write it down and just right in front of me. You know what I mean? So totally agree with that. It would be interesting to explore that. We're not doing that at the moment. We need to look into that. So that's interesting that we will do that. In terms of the 10% and 20%, at the moment, we're not doing that everywhere. So what we're trying to say is we want to go beyond building regs and do the 10%. It was the 10% came, it was called the sort of the Merton law or the Merton rule about 10 or 15 years ago when it came in, and it's sort of been adopted by a number of councils since. I don't think we can go any further than that, unfortunately. We'd like to, we can encourage it, but whether we can actually require it, I'm not sure we can. There is something in the report that said about how far we can actually go in terms of that policy. I can't find it when I need it, but there is a limit to what we can do. But yeah, certainly encourage that. And going forward, we need to do more of that. We need to make sure buildings are, the building roofs are the right direction as well. But how do you do that? You've got the balance of getting the building roof the right way for the sun when you've got to try and respect the character of the street. So there's a number of different issues to balance as well. But no, I totally agree. The more, the better, wouldn't it be, really? We'll see what we can do.
Are you happy with that? Do you want to come back on that at all?
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, the number of developments, I watched quite a few of the planning committee, I know I'm sad, last year. And the number of developments that had weird and wonderful pointy outy bits to make them look pretty. When those roofs could be so much better utilised by having solar on them. Designers over engineers problem again that we seem to run into occasionally. That's about it, really. Thank you.
I suppose one of the things I came across in previous local plans where I've tried to push the solar voltaic side, or just trying to do the 10% increase, what we get told by developers and everyone is that actually increasing insulation is far better than putting renewable energy on the roof. And that's their way they'll meet the percentages that we set. So it's an interesting balance we need, and obviously making sure the house, first of all, doesn't leak energy is good. But yes, we should be doing as much as we can to do solar voltaics wherever we can, and we'll try and do that, definitely.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a few people on the list. Councillor Rice, you're next.
Yes, so I think we're hearing that everybody's really keen for sort of us to push as much as possible. So I was wondering, firstly, how are we ensuring that we are going to be one of the most ambitious councils in the UK? Like, what learning are we doing from other councils that have maybe introduced some of the ideas around, for example, the fuse boxes? Like, there must be lots of little things, and I'm wondering that we are ensuring that we're tapping into that. And then my second question was around transport. So transport decarbonisation is the one area in the UK and the majority of the world that isn't decarbonising, because as vehicles become more efficient, then people drive further and travel more. So you've spoken about the low sort of walkable neighbourhoods, which is great. But I am concerned that we still have employment sites that do not fit with that, and the conflict there, such as out at the airport, for example. And then the third thing is Climate Earth, a legal organisation, wrote to all councils several years ago, all councils that were developing local plans, and they wrote to them saying that local plans need to be in keeping with the government legislation of net zero by 2050. That's my understanding. And so I was wondering, what steps are we taking as a council to ensure to reduce our risk of legal challenge when we develop our local plan?
Thank you. 3 questions in there, I think.
Start with the last one because I can remember that one. And it might be the first one actually. But in terms of the decarbonising of the transport side of things, we're waiting for a big government report to come out and government policy on this, and because what that is going to do is going to tell us how we do local transport plan 4, which is we're just starting as an authority working with Dorset to do local transport plan 4. It will follow along from the local plan, and it will set up our transport strategy. So, but we're waiting on government guidance on what to do about decarbonising that. So that's, I'm told by our transport plan, is something we have to wait for. Obviously, what we're doing as a local authority is to try and encourage alternatives so that people don't have to use the vehicles. I wasn't quite sure what you meant about in a pool and the employment not being well suited to decarbon or to sustainable transport?
Just with regards to some employment sites, some large employment sites are being picked that are not close to housing. So it's not going to be possible to walk there. And they're not particularly on cycle routes, and there's limited bus provision. So the airport is a classic example. So that is not in keeping with a 15-minute walkable neighbourhood whereby people are able to walk to their day-to-day activities, including work.
I mean, employment's one of our biggest problems because we've got a very limited number of employment sites. We're having to use the airport as one of the options we've got, with around about 30 hectares there, which is almost half of our employment supply would have to be at the airport. We've got some good sites within the urban area, but we have to go with the airport, otherwise we can't meet the need, and that is the problem we've got. So we're having to allocate it. Otherwise, the other option is to look at rolling back the green belt somewhere else. But wherever we roll the green belt back to do employment use, it's still going to be generating car trips. It'll be still in an unsustainable location, unless you went for Bearwood and Merley with its new bus service. Once it's got that, and then that would be a better location. But what we need to try and do is look at how we can make the airport more sustainable in terms of, sustainable access to it, and that's something we need to do. We haven't secured it all through the planning permission we wanted to, but we need to keep working on that, I think, going forward. There's a third question, isn't there? And that's the scale. Did you remind me what the other one was?
That was the the legal requirements of the local plan.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we would legally be obliged to do that. I mean, in terms of 2050, the way it can work is that everyone does everything exactly the same until the day before the end of 2049, and then suddenly we turn everything off and we're zero carbon ready in 2050. We're not going to try and do that. We're trying to be ahead of that, and we've set the ambition in the local plan to achieve carbon neutral status before 2050. That's the plan, the aim of the local plan. So we've got to try and do as much as we can, but it is very limited what we can do with the local plan. I should point that out. We can't solve everything. I don't see any legal challenge problem. I'd love to say it was a solution for everything. We could do set a framework, but then it's what we do underneath that framework. But I don't think there's any legal challenge side to that would cause us a problem that I'm aware of. But you might want to resend me that and I'll re-look at it and check with legal.
I was looking for the email and I didn't get it because it got sent to an officer when I was portfolio holder, but we were warned about it. So perhaps somebody officer-wise could look into that and check, because obviously as a council we don't want that risk like hanging over us. We want to make sure that we're looking into that.
Thank you, Councillor Rice, and yeah, we can make a request if that's available somewhere, if we can try and lay our hands on it. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a question. It's sort of, I appreciate the sort of come back around to what Councillor Northover was saying. But in terms of sustainability and in these centres, you know, as Bournemouth Central Ward Councillor, and probably what I've seen is probably shared by the other centres, is that when we had this great workshopping, everything seemed to be based on proximity. So obviously it does make sense to put in a lot of housing potentially in Bournemouth Central because it already has the access to the bus routes, and also because when you look at the 15-minute the nature of a neighbourhood. But then if you do put in that housing, is there, rather than just saying, oh, it's a proximity to a school and to a doctor's, is it taken into account as well about actually the increased numbers, and potentially we need more of those, we'll need more doctor surgeries and more schools to actually sustain that building?
Thank you, Steve.
So with all of the housing sites that we've identified, or the employment sites, we've sent all those out to all our service providers to ask for what they will need to meet that demand. It hasn't identified much in terms of schools yet, and I haven't been able to engage with our school team yet. I'm still trying to set up a meeting, hopefully have one in the next month or so. I've got the data on schools. It's showing there's been a decline generally in births. We've known that for a long while. There's a current bulge going through secondary school, which will cease in 2028. Then we'll see a decline, and we might see empty classrooms, and we might see some schools start to have viability concerns due to the lack of children coming through the system. So we know in terms of schools, there's probably not going to be a need going forward, but we're going to look at that in detail. The In terms of doctors, just to mention that as well, we know doctors' surgeries are always struggling. It's the most common used objection to any planning application that you can't get an appointment for 3 weeks. The way the doctors work is slightly different. The NHS fund doctors based on population. So coming back to population that was mentioned earlier by Councillor Northover, you know, the more population you've got, the more doctors you have. And so for, I can't remember how many it is, for every extra number of 1,000 people, you get an extra doctor, something like that, the NHS funds. What we can do is help the doctor surgeries to expand. We don't own them, we can't control them, but the doctors themselves can, you know, try to cater for greater demand by expanding their building and trying to do things that way, and then they can put another doctor in, etc. So we can help doctors, practices or medical practices expand or find new locations. So that's what we'll do. It's difficult though because they're all private sectors, so they don't really engage with us on that. Sometimes they do. So for example, again, I'll use the Bearwood and Merley example. They've engaged with us there. They want to. There's almost a competition to try and see who can get the doctor surgery in first, so that they get all the new customers. When the houses are built, and then also Hamworthy as well. Same sort of thinking that the doctors there were trying to compete to get the best population. So it's a bit of a market system, if you see what I mean. So it's very hard for us to control, but we do try and look at that. And so when we did the workshops last week, we had doctor surgeries in schools as some of the key things that we need to have within a walkable distance and certainly a bus distance, and also dentists and everything else. So that was the idea through the workshops, trying people to tell us, because not all the service providers are telling us, tell us what's missing so we can try and help with that. So I hope that answers your question. We are looking at the two, making sure infrastructure goes with it, but we're limited in what we can do. But obviously locating development to where we know the infrastructure is really good helps. There's a failing school, we can help the school expand, you know, to get the school rolls back, which is one way we can certainly help.
Thank you. Do you want to follow up on that as well? Okay. I thought my list was longer than it was. So, if Councillor Dedman.
Yes, I've got a couple of things to pick up. Steve, I think I heard you say at some point, if we replaced bungalows with townhouses, can I just say what a brilliant idea? But just generally, because it would, you know, it gives far better population balance. My other question was about the car charging points. I can't see how that would work first, because a lot of houses don't have a place to put a car. So why would you want a car charging point? So why would we be asking builders to put them in? And why would we all want a car if we're all going on buses? So I think that sounds, you know, you're going around in circles with it. Another point I wanted to make just generally was that last year there was a 75% increase in insolvencies in smaller developers, not the big ones, they're doing quite well. And I think we need to be very careful about how we pile this on in order, you know, to pay another, what was it, 100 quid for a bigger fuse box. Yeah, but it, you know, it all eats in. It's all onerous. But my main question, Chairman, you'll be pleased to know, is on, I think it's page 3, where the government is, you put what the government is, a raft of planning reforms, that sounds brilliant, replacement of the duty to cooperate with neighbouring authorities. How are they going to, are they replacing it, removing it? Because when we were in Christchurch Borough, as opposed to here, we were quite looking forward to spreading into the New Forest.
Steve, anything on that, on Christchurch Annex in the New Forest?
I just remember the conversations when New Forest had 3,000 homes. They were trying to get us to. You remember through due to cooperate, they would say, we've got 3,000 homes. Where can you put them? BCP. Well, we weren't BCP then. We were all our separate authorities. So the duty to cooperate. So through the new planning system, currently, so just say for everyone's benefits, the way the duty to cooperate currently is, if we can't meet our housing need, we can ask Dorset Council to meet our housing need for us, and they have to kind of agree to that. We have to, as a duty to cooperate together. Under the new planning system, they're going to remove the duty to cooperate. Like I say, it comes down to, in terms of defining your housing need, you define your own housing need. It's not then up to your neighbour to try and meet that missing need. But the government is talking about alignment policies, and we'll wait to see what that means and what that will be. From our point of view, though, of course, we are pretty landlocked. It's very difficult for us to do much unless we go into Greenbelt. Dorset Council, of course, will say, well, if they're going to have to release some of their Greenbelt to meet some of our need, we should be doing that ourselves. So we recognise that's a problem at the moment under the current system, which is why we need the changes to the MPPF. And hopefully, if they come through and we don't have to meet that need, we'll find a way of moving the local plan forward, which is really important to us. There was a second point there. I forgot what it was, but I was going to come back on it. But
they weren't really points.
No.
They were just observations, judging by what people have been saying, all through. But it was the duty to cooperate I was interested in, really. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions myself, actually. I want to focus on what page is it? For paragraphs 35 onwards to about 41, which is the water efficiency that we're looking at. So I think water efficiency and also wastewater and sewage water and that, because we all know what it's like as soon as you get heavy rainfall. My phone starts going off and telling me that I shouldn't go in the sea for a surf or a swim or anything like that. And if we've got developments of, say whatever it might be, 1,000 plus new houses per year, that's 1,000 more toilet flushes or 4,000 more, however many, 1,000 more showers, 1,000 more everything. It's all putting pressure on our local sewage system. So we know that from what we heard from Wessex Water the other year, that they're kind of bound by policy at the moment and how much they can do to change this and how slowly this is actually going to happen. So what can we build into our developments to ensure that we minimise surface runoff water as much as possible? I'm thinking like green roofs, blue roofs, soakaways, things like this. Can we start putting pressure on that? Because otherwise we're going to find it's not when heavy rainfalls happen and that we're going to get the combined sewage water overflows operating. It's going to be every time it's raining. So is there thought going into that and how we can make the development self-sustaining on the waterfront?
The answer is yes, which is good. We've got a policy on SUDS, so we're going to have a policy on SUDS that all developments should be providing SUDS to, and through various, like you say, extra greening, green roofs, all that will be in there to try and reduce surface water. One of the things that we're doing a lot of mapping at the moment, we finally got a report back, it's only taken a year, from one of our consultants on our flood risk assessment. And what we've been looking at in the past, we've always looked at tidal and we've always looked at fluvial. We're now looking at surface water flooding as being an issue. So trying to see how that impacts, so actually having that mapped properly so we can model it and see how that modelling affects where development goes and what the impacts will be from development. So, and actually it's interesting because some of the sites we were thinking of development could actually be storage areas for water. So you start thinking, well, actually, instead of allocating that site for employment, there's another employment like lost. You're actually saying, well, that's a really good place for the floodwater to it already is an obvious area for floodwater. So let it, if we were to suddenly redevelop it, how do we make up that lost storage? So there's all that work's being looked at. Is taking time, unfortunately, to get the modelling system done. And then there's a number of assumptions that go in over climate change. No one knows what the assumptions are, how much climate change is going to be on annual rainfall. So, but yeah, certainly all looking at that, looking at SUDS, and we'll have a policy on SUDS, policy on, like I say, cliff tops we were talking about earlier as well. So there's a number of different things that our flood team are putting together for us in the local plan, which I hope will help you and allay your concerns. And obviously the water efficiency is another issue, reducing the amount of water each house is allowed to produce. So was it 110? I think from 125 litres per person per day down to 110 litres per person per day. So by very simple things you build into that, just like the ducting, just like the fuse board, very simple things you can put into a house to reduce the amount of water usage.
Thank you. You kind of answered my second question there as well, because I was going to ask about attenuation tanks and stuff like that and how we can do it. So that's great. Thank you. Which means I'll take a turn onto the other thing. Biodiversity net gain. I've seen how you've got biodiversity net gain guidance, and that will be published shortly to support the emerging policy. Is that our BCP policy on it, which is going to be? And my question is, it says late 2023. When's late 2023? Is that like December or is it, September?
Biodiversity net gains. The real problem with biodiversity net gain, it's been so watered down that the threshold that's now been set for which qualifying developments would have to provide 10% biodiversity net gain is so small. I think I put 18% in the report. I saw the other day it's actually 14%, so I've over-egged it in the report. 14% of all our applications, looking at our past applications, would actually meet the threshold. So what we wanted to do was say all development should provide some form of biodiversity net gain. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll ask for 10% under the government mandatory way, but what we can ask all development to do is to do something. And so that's what we've got, a guidance note that's been written, is ready to go. It's just ready for sign off and publication. We just haven't done it yet. We can bring it out as early as you want us to. The final version, I saw of it last week. It just needs sign off. It's got, it was agreed by.
Be careful what you say. Tomorrow morning.
I think you've seen it. No, but it needs to go through, probably just needs sign off through with Jess in liaison with the portfolio holder. That's where it went from cabinet. I think it was cabinet at the end of last year. So it's taken us a while to get there because we've been waiting to see what government's doing. Government keeps saying it's going to publish its guidance and doesn't, and it's supposed to be bringing it in November, and it still doesn't know how it's doing it in November. So we're trying to obviously align our BCP policy alongside that. So that's why we've kind of delayed it a bit, just to make sure we don't miss anything and miss any tricks.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's an area that I've worked in for a while, and I've seen some great policies and some absolutely terrible ones. So it's good to know that it's well thought out and have a lot in there. So.
Maybe I should run the draft one by you to see if it's good or bad.
Always welcome to, yeah. We've got about maybe 15 minutes left. Anyone? Councillor Rice, was that you?
Just on that. Oh, sorry. Just on that biodiversity paper, then. Do we know that it's one of the best in the country? Or like
it's BCPs, of course. I was sorry, Chair, cutting across. Would it be something that you'd like us to bring here before it gets finalised?
I wouldn't want to delay it as such by bringing it here, because I don't think we have another meeting now until October. So I'd rather see it going through the process to get signed off and happen rather than coming to us and delaying it any further. That's all right.
Can we just see it informally? Like, and feedback things informally, like, yeah.
I think what we need to do first is brief the portfolio holder. Obviously, we've got a new administration. We want to make sure they're up to speed with it. But absolutely, I see no reason why we can't. Then, once we've got a final draft, to be able to share it for comments. Unless you've got anything.
Yeah, that'd be great.
No, just my other comments. Alongside BNG, we've got a lot of different competing priorities to look at in terms of policy. So we tried to create one all-encompassing policy for the local plan that covers, which I've covered in the report, which has got local nature recovery areas, which has got biodiversity net gain. We've got a tree cover strategy, so we're trying to get extra tree cover, urban greening, trying to meet Naturally England's urban greening factors. So trying on one side, we're trying to say we need to be much greener. We also need loads more trees to beat our tree cover, but we also need to do biodiversity net gain. And sometimes biodiversity net gain will say it's not tree cover because the actual habitat here is not trees. So we've got a number of competing demands. We've tried to do that in a policy to say how we'll do that going forward. So that's quite exciting, really. So that's the best in the country, I hope, because it'll be emerging and new. But we'll see. How far can I push it? It's going to be the best. There you go.
We're trying.
We're trying, yeah, of course.
Great to hear. Councillor Detman.
I just wanted to come back and apologise for having said something which I now see is right on the last page of the report. But I do have to say, in my defence, I am a sub, so I hadn't read right down to item 65. It was about the additional policy costs placed upon developers must be factored in, might be less, all that. Yeah, so thank you. It is in there as a risk factor.
Thank you. Anyone else got anything to say? Because what I was hoping to do with this, and I think we've covered like a really broad church of what was included in this report and not included in it as well, which has been really helpful. Thank you. But to try and find if there was a couple of areas where we maybe wanted to focus as a committee and maybe look for a report and develop. I think the biodiversity one would have been great if we'd done this 12 months ago. But where we're at now, if there's anything that's particularly piqued anyone's interest, you don't need to shout out now and say what it would be, but after reading the report and digesting what we've heard today, if there's any areas where we think that this committee could give some real good input into the development of the local plan in some particular areas, and that goes for you as well. So if there's anything you wanted us to look at or anything you think which could benefit from our oversight, or even like having a working group. I know we've got the tree working group from this committee, which has not remet yet, but anything like that where you think we can add value and help direct policy and ideas and things like that, which maybe you've not thought about or could do with some extra oversight, then please let us know, and we'd be happy to have a look at it and see what we're able to do. But if there's nothing else anyone wants to add to this, I think we can probably draw that to a close and say thank you very much for coming for that. It's been really, really useful. I've really enjoyed the discussion around that, and thank you to the committee as well. I think you've done some really good work. And that brings us on to agenda item 8, which is the future work plan. What I wanted to do with this is we're supposed to be looking and considering and identifying the priorities for the next meeting. Our next meeting is, like I said before, it's October. I can't remember, early October sometime.
11th October.
11th of October. Thank you very much, Lindsay. But before that, there are going to, I know there's been some talks about reforms to overview and scrutiny, place and corporate and community, and how that's going to be changing, and how the policy areas which we're focused on is going to be changing. And also we've been promised a workshop to work through this as well, which hasn't happened yet due to these changes wanting to come in. So what I'd like to suggest, if the committee is happy with it, is that for the next meeting, myself and the vice chair go away and we look at what we've got already on the future plan, which was attached to the agenda. So this is things which have overspilt from last year, which have not been looked at yet, and take some of these items off and make sure these get looked at, because some of them have been floating around for quite a while. And then when we get the workshop to come together, we can all do a good workshop day and develop our plan for the next year and the next 5 meetings from that point, if that sounds reasonable to everyone as something we can agree to do. And just for clarity on it as well, the items which I'd probably want to bring if they're in a position to come here is items 2 and 3 on the forward plan, which is the flooding and FCERM, and also the place strategy as well. So they'd be the ones at the top of my agenda for the next meetings, unless something crops up which we really want to go and have a look at, or someone brings to our attention beforehand, or in fact maybe we get a really good place strategy in the next couple of months. But if everyone's happy to agree that, yeah. Well, I'll take that as agreed. Thank you very much.
Can we get any update?
Could we just, is there any way we could get a short update on where the place strategy might be at the moment, or where it's sitting?
I don't know the answer. I'll be very honest with you. I can check and we can get an update. But and Kate Langdown will be able to. I know we have had recent discussions, so Kate Langdown will be able to give an update on what the timeline looks like.
Yeah, please, Lindsay.
So, Chair, we can go off, and provided that you're earmarking that for the next meeting, we can check it out with officers and see if something could be brought on what the current status is around the place strategy. But the FCERM item is a cabinet report anyway, so that timescale fits with the cabinet date for October.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Okay, at that point, this brings us to the end of the agenda. The only point is the dates for the next meeting, which is the 11th of October, the 6th of December, and the 28th of February next year. So somehow I'm going to close this place ONS committee meeting before 8 o'clock. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you everyone for the reports. Thank you if anyone was watching along at home, and have a nice evening.